The hostess didn't look up when Dion walked in. She was standing right there, clipboard in hand, scanning the room like she was taking inventory of everything except him. Two couples had come in behind him. She smiled at both of them, asked if they had reservations, told them it would be just a moment. Then she turned back to her podium and started writing something. And Dion was still standing there in his paint-flecked work jacket, his boots still carrying dust from the job site, waiting. He didn't say anything. He never did, in moments like this. He just stood. The Magnolia Room wasn't the kind of place Dion Briggs normally walked into. The chandeliers were low and gold, and the tablecloths were the kind of white that suggested they'd never seen a spill. The waitstaff moved like they'd been choreographed. Everything about the place whispered money. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announced itself, but the quiet, settled kind, the kind that assumed you already knew. Dion had driven 40 minutes to get here. He was tired. He'd been on a roof since 6 that morning, and it was now past 1 in the afternoon, and he hadn't eaten since a granola bar on the way to work. He'd picked the Magnolia Room specifically because his younger sister, Kezia, had her birthday dinner here last year and came home talking about the short ribs for 2 weeks straight. He figured just once he'd try it. He waited another 90 seconds. He counted. "Excuse me," he said finally. The hostess glanced up. Something shifted in her face. Not rude, exactly. Just careful in a way that felt worse than rude. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," he said. "Is that required for lunch?" A small pause. "We do prefer reservations." She looked at her clipboard. "But I can check if we have anything available at the bar." The bar, not a table. The bar. "That's fine," Dion said, because it was easier than arguing, because he was hungry. She led him to the far end of the bar, past the main dining room, past the booths by the window with their afternoon light, past the small four-tops with their single-stem flowers in bud vases. She set him at the very end of the bar, near the service station, where the kitchen noise was loudest, and a plastic tray of dirty glassware sat on the counter waiting to be collected. A bartender came over eventually. Young guy, pressed white shirt, eyes that moved past Dion before they landed on him. "What can I get you?" "Menu," Dion said. The menu arrived. Dion looked it over. Short ribs, $32. Lobster bisque to start. The kind of prices that didn't bother him today. He'd had a good month, and he'd decided he was allowed this. He ordered the bisque, the short ribs, and a glass of sweet tea. The bisque came out lukewarm. Not cold enough to send back, not warm enough to enjoy. He ate it anyway, spooning through the orange cream, finding the small chunks of lobster that seemed rationed like they were being hoarded somewhere. He pushed the bowl aside when he was done and waited for the ribs, the couple 2 seats down, white, mid-50s, the woman in a linen blazer. Got their food first, even though they'd sat down after him. He noticed and then told himself he was being uncharitable, and then noticed it again. The ribs arrived. The plate was beautiful. He'd give them that. Bone-in, braised dark, sitting in a shallow pool of sauce that smelled like red wine and thyme. He cut into the meat. It pulled away from the bone exactly like Kezia had described. He raised the fork, and then he stopped. He lowered the fork slowly. He looked at the plate for a long moment. Then he set the fork down on the edge of the plate, very carefully, the way you do when you're trying not to react before you've processed what you're seeing. There was something moving in the sauce, not something large, not something you'd see from across the room, but up close, in the light from the pendant above the bar, in the shallow pool of braised jus at the edge of the plate. Small, pale, unmistakable. Moving. Dion sat very still. His appetite was gone. The kind of gone that doesn't come back for a while. He looked around for the bartender. The young man was at the other end of the bar, laughing at something on his phone. Dion waited. He raised a hand. The bartender looked up, registered him, looked back down at his phone. A minute passed. Dion raised his hand again. The bartender came over with the energy of someone doing a favor. "I need to speak to a manager," Dion said. He kept his voice level. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Dion said. "I need a manager." Something in his tone must have landed because the bartender's posture shifted slightly. He disappeared through the kitchen door. Dion sat with the plate in front of him, the fork still balanced on the rim, and he did not touch anything. The woman in the linen blazer 2 seats down glanced at him. He didn't look back. The manager who emerged from the kitchen was a broad man in his 40s named Galt. That's what his name tag said. No first name, just Galt. The kind of name tag that implied he was used to being the last word. He walked toward Dion. with the measured pace of someone who had dealt with complainers before and had developed a strategy for them. Slightly sympathetic expression. Hands clasped in front. Already preparing to explain why whatever the customer thought happened, didn't. Sir, I understand there's a concern. Look at the plate, Dion said. Galt looked at the plate. His expression didn't change, not at first. Then it changed considerably. I see, he said. I'd like to know what that is, Dion said. Sir, I assure you, this is not something that... I'm not asking for assurances, Dion said, still calm, still level. I'm asking what that is, and I'm asking how it got on my plate. Galt straightened, and here is where things went wrong. Not for Dion, though it would take a little time to become clear. For Galt, because what Galt did next was look at Dion. Really look at him. At the work jacket, at the boots, at the calluses on the hands resting on the bar. He made some calculation, the kind people make in under 2 seconds, the kind they'd deny making if you asked them about it. Sir, he said, with a different energy now, something harder underneath the professional tone. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Dion had not raised his voice. I'm going to comp your bisque, Galt said, but I'm afraid I can't take the plate back without reviewing it with our kitchen staff, and I'm going to need you to let us handle this internally. Internally, Dion repeated. Our kitchen maintains the highest sanitation standards. I'm sure there's an explanation. There's something alive on my plate. I understand you feel that way. The woman in the linen blazer had stopped eating. The bartender had busied himself very thoroughly at the far end of the bar. A waiter passing through the service station slowed for just a moment before keeping on. I feel that way, Dion said quietly. Because it's true. Galt pulled the plate toward himself, angled it away from the bar. I'm going to take this back to the kitchen. We'll take the bisque off your bill. A pause. And I'm going to have to ask you, sir, once more, to moderate your tone while you're in this establishment. Dion Briggs had been speaking at a perfectly normal volume this entire time. 2 other patrons in the bar could confirm this. The woman in the linen blazer would later say, unprompted, that she had never heard him raise his voice. Galt took the plate and walked back toward the kitchen, and the door swung shut behind him, and Dion sat at the end of the bar near the dirty glassware and the kitchen noise. And he thought about a lot of things. He thought about his boots. He thought about the hostess and the bar seat. He thought about the fork balanced on the rim of a plate he hadn't finished. He thought about his sister, Kezia, and the short ribs and how she'd described them. He thought about the 40-minute drive, and then he thought about the card in his wallet. Not his debit card, not his driver's license. The other one. The one with the logo of a company called Briggs & Calloway Hospitality Group, printed in clean serif type, underneath his name, and the words managing partner. Dion Briggs had been in the restaurant business for 11 years. He had started at 19, washing dishes at a breakfast diner in Columbus, Ohio, working doubles on weekends to pay for his mother's car repairs after his father left. He had worked the line, learned the floor, managed a mid-sized chain's 3 locations in his mid-20s. At 31, he and his business partner, Felice Calloway, had pooled their savings, hers from 15 years in hospitality operations, his from a decade of watching what worked and what didn't, and founded Briggs & Calloway. They now owned 4 restaurants across 2 states, with a 5th under construction, and a small hotel property in Savannah that had been named in a regional travel magazine 3 months ago. He was in Nashville for a site visit. One of his locations was up for a James Beard regional nomination, and he'd taken the afternoon to walk the neighborhood, eat lunch somewhere he hadn't tried before. He'd worn what he wore to job sites because he'd come from one, and because it didn't occur to him to change. It had never occurred to him that it should have to. He sat at the bar for 2 more minutes after Galt disappeared. Then he took out his phone and called Felice. How was the bisque, she said, because she knew where he was going. It was fine, he said. I have a situation, he told her. She was quiet for a moment in the way that meant she was deciding something. Do you want me to make a call? She said. Not yet, he said. He hung up. He put the phone back in his pocket. He put his hands flat on the bar and looked at the surface of it. Dark wood, a little tacky near the rail. The kind of wear that suggested either heavy use or poor maintenance, probably both. A different server appeared, younger, female, nervous in the specific way of someone who'd been sent to deliver information they didn't write. Sir, the manager wanted me to let you know that we've removed the bisque from your bill, and we'd like to offer you a complimentary dessert. No thank you, Dion said. He also wanted me to let you know that if you have further concerns, you're welcome to fill out a comment card. A comment card? What's your name? Dion asked. The server blinked. Lacey, how long have you been working here? About 8 months. Do you like it? She opened her mouth, closed it. It's okay. Do you know what I do for work, Lacey? She shook her head, he told her. He watched her face move through 3 separate expressions in under 4 seconds. Confusion, then recalibration, then something that looked like genuine dismay. I am going to fill out a comment card, he said, but I'm also going to need to speak to whoever owns this property. The Magnolia Room was owned by a hospitality group called Fenwick Southern Holdings, headquartered in Charlotte. They had 17 locations across the southeast, mostly in the fine dining and upscale casual segments, and they had been looking for the past 6 months at the possibility of expanding their Nashville presence. They had, in fact, been in preliminary conversations with 2 potential partners about a consulting arrangement that might help them identify the right neighborhood, the right concept, the right price point. One of the people they had spoken to, twice by phone, was Dion Briggs. He had not mentioned this to Galt. He had not mentioned it to the hostess or the bartender or Lacey the server. He had sat at the end of a bar near a tray of dirty glassware and ordered a $32 plate of short ribs and been told, at a moderate volume, to moderate his tone. He called the regional director of Fenwick Southern Holdings at 4:15 that afternoon. From the parking lot of the restaurant, the regional director's name was Alton Merritt, and he picked up on the second ring, and the first thing he said was, Dion, I was actually about to call you. We've been moving on that Nashville conversation, and I wanted to get your thoughts on. Alton, Dion said, I need to tell you about my lunch today, he told him. The bar seat, the lukewarm bisque, the plate, the manager, the comment card. There was a long silence. Where are you right now? Alton said. Parking lot of your Nashville location, Dion said. Another silence. Don't go anywhere, Alton said. What happened next took about 45 minutes. Dion sat on a bench outside the restaurant and answered emails and watched the valet stand for a while and ate a granola bar from his jacket pocket because he was still hungry. Alton Merritt arrived at 5 o'clock sharp, having driven directly from his office in an apparent state of barely contained urgency. He was followed within 10 minutes by the district manager for the Nashville region, a woman named Patricia Ossie, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the manner of someone who had fixed complicated problems before and found it tiresome that they kept happening. They went inside together. Dion watched through the window as the hostess recognized Patricia and went slightly pale. He watched Galt emerge from the kitchen and recognize Alton and undergo a visible physical rearrangement, his whole posture shifting from authority into something else. Dion went back inside when Lacey came out and found him on the bench. They're asking for you, she said. She was still nervous, but it was a different kind of nervous now. Not trained to manage a complaint nervous. Genuine. Lacey, he said, standing. You did nothing wrong today. I want you to know that. She nodded, and her chin did something complicated. Inside, Galt was standing near the hostess stand, and his face when he saw Dion Briggs walk in and shake hands with Alton Merritt, and Patricia Ossie was a thing that several staff members who witnessed it would describe later in varying terms. The bartender, who had been watching from behind the bar, said it looked like a man remembering something he'd forgotten in a bad way. Lacey, who was closest, said she thought for a moment that he might apologize. He didn't. He stood very still and said nothing, which was somehow worse. Patricia Ossie spoke first. She thanked Dion for his patience. She said the words unacceptable and immediate review and does not reflect our standards, and she said them with the efficient precision of someone who meant them. She turned to Galt and said several things that weren't meant for Dion to hear, but he heard them anyway, and they were direct. The kitchen was reviewed. The prep station where the short ribs had been finished was identified as the source of a drainage problem that had apparently existed for 3 weeks, flagged twice by line staff, and not addressed. The work order was in the system. Nobody had followed up on it. This information came out quietly, methodically, the way these things do when people start talking under pressure. A sous chef named Vance, who had raised the drainage issue himself and been told by Galt that it wasn't priority, turned out to have documentation. He had emailed about it. He had the timestamp. By the time the afternoon was over, Galt was no longer employed by the Magnolia Room. He was not fired with drama. There was no scene. Patricia Osi simply asked him to come with her to the office, and they were in there for 12 minutes, and he came out carrying his jacket and his phone, and he didn't look at anyone as he walked toward the door. Dion watched him go. He didn't feel the particular satisfaction people sometimes imagine for moments like that. What he felt was closer to tired, and something beneath the tired that was harder to name. A kind of recognition, maybe, of how often this particular story played out. How many times a man in a work jacket at a bar got handed a comment card instead of an answer. He thought about Vance, the sous chef, who had sent emails about a drainage problem and been told it wasn't priority. He thought about Lacey, who had been sent out to offer him dessert she knew wasn't the point. He asked to speak with Patricia before he left. The sous chef, he said. Vance. He flagged the problem through proper channels. That matters. Patricia looked at him over her reading glasses. I noted that. I'd like to know what happens with him. That's an internal matter, she said. It is, Dion agreed. I'm making a professional recommendation, not a demand. You're looking at expanding in Nashville. The people who maintain your standards when no one's watching are the ones worth keeping. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded, once. Dion drove back to his hotel through Nashville traffic, the city golden in the late afternoon, and he called Kezia. How were the short ribs? She asked immediately because she'd seen his location when he'd texted her at lunch. I didn't finish them, he said. What? Why? He told her the short version. She made a sound that was half outrage, half gratification, because Kezia had a strong sense of justice and also loved being right about things mattering. So what happened to the manager, she said. He's not working there anymore. Good, she said. Then, after a pause, were the ribs at least good? Before? He laughed, and it was the first real laugh he'd had since the morning. I don't know, he said. I only had one bite. That's a travesty, she said. It is. You should open a restaurant in Nashville, she said. Better ribs, better everything. He was quiet for a moment. The construction site for his 5th location was in East Nashville, 3 miles from where he was sitting in traffic right now. He'd signed the lease 2 months ago. He hadn't told Kezia yet. I'm working on it, he said. There is a particular kind of invisibility that comes with looking like you don't belong somewhere. Dion Briggs had worn it his whole life. At business meetings in conference rooms, where he was the only one in the room who'd had to fight for his seat. At site visits where people spoke to the white contractors around him and waited for one of them to answer. At restaurants where the hostess looked through him and the manager heard noise instead of information. He had learned, over years, that the invisibility was never about him. It was always about the person choosing not to see. What changed the day at the Magnolia Room was not Dion. He was the same man at the end of lunch that he'd been at the beginning. Same boots, same jacket, same hunger, though he'd eat it differently that evening. A burger from a place down the street, eaten standing up, which was the best meal he'd had in weeks. What changed was the Magnolia Room itself, in the 45 minutes after Alton Merritt walked through the door. A drainage problem got fixed. An email chain got surfaced. A sous chef who'd done the right thing and been ignored got a conversation with the district manager that, by all later accounts, went considerably well. And the comment card that Gall had offered like it was a resolution, stayed on the bar, unfilled, because Dion Briggs had decided that some things needed more than a card. Some things needed a phone call, and a parking lot, and a man sitting on a bench eating a granola bar while the city turned golden around him, patient in the way of someone who had always known that patience was not the same thing as acceptance. Vance got a promotion within the month. Patricia Osi signed off on it personally. Lacey, who had done nothing wrong that afternoon, kept her job and eventually moved into a floor supervisor role at a different Fenwick location, one where, she later said, the management actually listened when something was wrong. The 5th Briggs and Callaway location opened in East Nashville 14 months later. On the opening weekend, Dion's sister Kezia ate the short ribs. She said they were the best she'd ever had. He believed her.